Welcome to Occupations, the podcast, where we discuss what it's like to hold specific jobs. Occupations is brought to you by lotsofmaps.com, where you fulfill your vintage map gifting needs. Visit lotsofmaps.com.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Occupations, the podcast. I have a very special guest today, much more special than everybody else that's been here. Only, it's not fair for me to say that, but I can because she's my one and only, my love of my life, my wife, Jennifer Jagolinzer. Hi, Jen.
Hi, Andy.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
It's nice to meet you.
Thank you for having me here today.
Jen is a product development specialist dealing with apparel in the fashion world. And I think she's going to bring a lot to the table today. She's going to tell us all about her job, actually many jobs, because she's held many different positions. So Jen, let's start at the beginning.
All right.
What is a product development specialist?
A product development specialist is someone who helps bring products to market. So we work with the merchant team at Coldwater Creek, and we work with designers, and we help fill the voids. So we help develop a product that we think are going to be good sellers for our customers in the coming year. So my role is to help get everything made. So I may not be the one choosing which skirt, which top, which dress goes into the catalog, but I help get that dress made. I work with artists. I work with freelancers around the world, and together we work to pitch colors for prints. Sometimes we purchase prints from print studios to help get all those things made. We'll work with freelance designers to get embroideries designed and developed. And together we work as a team to decide what the best products for our customers is going to be. And it changes and it evolves. We have to listen to our business plans. It changes and evolves. We look at our business data every day. It changes. Customers buy different things on different days. But over time, you can really see the trends emerge. So you know when pinks aren't really working very well, or if yellows were the least selling color out of everything. Those kinds of data points start to kind of show up, and then you can know, okay, well, she doesn't like yellow. She doesn't like these coral colors this season. But she really did respond to blues or plums or deeper colors. So we're always trying to be nimble that way and kind of give the customer what they want and also kind of anticipate what they're going to want in the coming year. So we have to kind of be a little bit part fortune teller in a lot of ways. That's always been the way for people that are involved in fashion. You just have to kind of really be intuitive with what has worked, what hasn't worked, and kind of factor in a little bit of risk involved in there too.
That was great.
I should also say that we work with overseas mills and factories, and we partner with them every day to help get everything executed. We do some American-made product, not a lot, but we do. A lot of our knit tops come out of a factory in the United States. We work a lot with India. We work a lot with China. I'm constantly working with them. I'm communicating with them every day just to try to get deadlines met and to follow up on our status of where we are with our collection every season. And we'll have multiple collections going at a time. So we might be working on 3 or 4 different catalogs at a time. So it's always a challenge to keep everything going.
Okay, and you have been in this business for an awful long time. I know that you've held many different positions, and I know you can tell us about all of those, but let's start at the beginning. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in the same town you did, Framingham, Massachusetts.
Oh, yeah, that's right. When did you get a sense that you might be interested in creative, in fashion? At what point in your life, how old were you when that happened?
Probably high school. I was born from artists. My father was a painter. My mother was a textile designer and weaver and spinner. So I grew up with all of these paints, and my dad went to the School of Museum of Fine Arts, so he was a very skilled artist, did a lot of woodcut prints and paintings, watercolors, oils, acrylics, and I grew up watching them paint and create. So I think that I had that creative bug like my whole life. But I think it was when I was in high school that I kind of started paying attention to dress and how people expressed themselves. And I thought that was really exciting. And then I started to kind of dial into designers and what they were doing. And I was shopping a lot. I was working in retail a lot. So I was seeing what was selling and what customers liked and responded to. And part of me thought that would be really cool to get into that, to have a business maybe someday and maybe my own line someday, which I never quite went in that direction exactly. But I knew that I just wanted to get into fashion somehow, learn how things were made, how to design. So I think in high school, probably my sophomore years, when I really started picking my classes so that I could work on a portfolio, so that I could know, I would eventually, that would lead me to portfolio critiques that were part of the process for a lot of colleges, especially FIT, which I had my eye on probably since I was a sophomore. So that's what I did. I started taking home economics. I learned how to sew. I kind of added art into I hadn't actually really gotten into art because I felt like I know how to do art. But I realized I needed to really work on my illustration hand, which my dad helped me out a lot with. But I just started kind of taking classes to kind of help me get where I knew I needed to be. And I actually also took a fashion history class at the Mass College of Art. And I also took design course at School of Fashion Design, which was on Newbury Street. And I think it's still in Boston somewhere, in some form, but I'm not exactly sure where they are anymore. But those were really great experiences because that helped me prepare myself mentally for interviewing and for college, just the college application process, and just knowing what I wanted. It helped kind of solidify that I really did want a career in fashion.
Obviously, your parents had a big influence on you creatively. I'm not asking you questions I don't already know, obviously, because I've known you for so long.
Right. But for the benefit of everybody at home.
Absolutely. But I know your father was an incredible artist and certainly taught you a lot, as your mom was as well. That led you eventually down the road to college. What was your idea going into college? Did you apply in many different places? Were you thinking fashion 100%? That was what you were going to do, or bust? Or did you have anything else?
I know I must have applied to other schools, but I know I was looking into like Savannah College of Art and Design. I know I was looking into these schools, but I was putting all my eggs in one basket and really just wanted to go to FIT. I thought New York City was the place for me. I had only been there once in my life. Somehow I latched onto that. I remember my dad took me down for a portfolio interview, and they had you sketch on the spot, and they gave you a critique, and they had you do some writing. And I remember having to do an overnight there with my dad and just thinking about like what life was going to be like there. And I remember getting an acceptance letter that I got in, and I think I was very lucky. I don't think that's the way people do college applications these days, but I was kind of set at going there. They were a strong school, good school. I liked the Midtown neighborhood. I liked that they had a campus that was closed off to traffic. It just felt really appealing to me on a lot of levels.
So what did you learn at school? What was your major?
It was apparel design.
Okay.
I did a 2-year program there. My classes were draping. I had fashion history, illustration. I had a sewing class where I was learning how to do very complicated hems and things I never knew before, construction. Classes that were just like really kind of intense. And a lot of kids struggled with sewing. A lot of kids struggled with the illustration. I was okay at both things. I think I had decent ideas. I remember having like a computer tech class too that was very funny. It was like, this is a mouse and this is RAM. And it was really way back in the day. And they knew computers were going to be like the forefront of everything.
But you got lucky in the sense that you really get your hands dirty
Oh, yes.
instead of
Yes.
pushing buttons.
Muslin, cutting out slopers, which are like basically pattern pieces that you're creating from scratch. Doing muslins, we did a lot of draping, which was just an amazing, amazing experience to work with fabric and to watch how it falls and to be able to do a muslin garment, which would like serve as your pattern and before you went and cut the real thing out of what we thought at the time was really expensive fabric. But it was really just like fabric that we could afford on a college budget. We would do sketches. At one point, I was in design studio in my second year there, and we had Mary McFadden come to our class, and every class had an advisor, and she was our advisor. And Mary McFadden is one of the great American fashion designers. She recently passed away. She was very, she was elitist, perhaps. She was a bit of a diva, perhaps. She came in, I remember, with a small entourage of people that took her coat for her. She came in and she critiqued our drawings and she gave us a theme. And then she came back and critiqued our drawings and selected drawings that would be made for final fashion show at the end of the year. And we spent the entire season creating this runway collection. And I had 2 garments that I had to make. And I remember she didn't come back for one of her appointments. And so we had to kind of forge on with our sketch vision and just hope that everything was okay. And I remember having to pull an all-nighter to fix a garment that she didn't like once we got it on the runway for the big show. And she just did not like what I did with this bandeau top. So I had to like redo the whole thing, which I did in your apartment. And
You still seem very hung up on that.
It was traumatizing. It was like Mary McFadden came in and had, she had words for me. And I'm like, oh gosh, I better fix this. And I remember like meeting my model the next day, and I was like, what did she say to you? And she's like, oh, she acknowledged that you fixed the garment and it made it down the runway. So I made it through the gauntlet of FIT. And it was great. I loved living there, and I loved the fast pace and the craziness. And I often said it was a bit like med school for clothing and sewing. And I met some very, very dear friends there, and I'm still in touch with them to this day. So it was just an amazing place to be in the late 80s, early 90s. It was Donna Karan was just like the thing. And there's so many wonderful designers that were just Jeffrey Bean, all of those great 80s legends before Michael Kors. It was like before so many big designers emerged.
So you finish college and you decide you're going back to Boston. You're not sticking around New York. You decided you're going to head back home.
Yeah. Some people got some job offers based right out of school. I didn't do any internships. FIT got really good after I left there. They got really good at offering internships and setting people up with design jobs. I didn't have that opportunity. So I packed up my room and I did move back to Boston. And I thought, at the end of the day, I am a Boston girl. I'm less of a New York girl than I am. And Boston's my home. My family was here. There were some small companies in Boston, some apparel companies, not a lot, but I followed them intently, and I tried to send resumes out, and I met with a few people and had a few portfolio interviews with them. At the end of the day, they were really just looking for stitchers, and they were looking for free help so that they could get their lines made, and that wasn't really appealing to me at all. And after having spent like a whole semester in design studio, I realized that maybe making designer gowns, maybe that clientele wasn't as relatable to me as I thought it would be. That clientele, I did want to know. The glamour aside, I wanted to know how to make horsehair braid trims and how to make corsets and the foundations that go underneath all these amazing garments. And I did get to make all of those things. But the thought of making clothing for other people was suddenly not as appealing to me. And so I kind of shifted my focus and just started sending resumes out everywhere I could. And eventually one hit.
Tell us a little more about that one that hit.
I had sent a resume for a job that I did not, I was, I never got a call back on, and they held on to my resume. So let that be a lesson to everybody. Just send the resume. They filled that position, but they held my resume because they liked something about my resume. And I had a nice interview with this company in Lawrence, Mass, and they were one of the last knitters in Massachusetts. And I was with Alps Sportswear for 9 years. Alps was like my first big apparel gig, and it was like working for your family, and it was just a wonderful environment to be in. And I ended up being a knitwear designer after a couple of years. I was working on CAD. I had free range to do all kinds of design and merchandising and marketing for them. And it was a really small company, so we all just wore a lot of hats. But I got to work with the VP of design and VP of sales and just make some really cool sweaters. And we had a mill down in Pennsylvania, so I got to go down there every once in a while and see how they functioned and how products were made, and have conversations about why certain parts of certain designs might not actually work. And sometimes I'd have to go back to the drawing board and make sure my knit stitches were in the right place and things like that. And it was just a wonderful learning experience.
So you're a knitwear designer. That's pretty cool. I would imagine designer, people probably think of Devil Wears Prada, and designers are divas, like you were saying Mary McFadden was, and that it's evil and one person makes all the decisions. But I know that's not the truth.
You're correct. This was sportswear, American-made apparel, and it was a very, very different, maybe perhaps more rustic environment. We had an office in a mill building where we warehoused everything. It was not glamorous at all, and I loved it.
And I know you were the new kid on the block there, and you brought some youthfulness in your design skills that they did not currently have. So I know you did some things there that really kind of changed the way they did their work as well.
I think we kind of dug into the technology a little bit. We ended up using this CAD system to help build their catalog without a lot of photography, just using some texture mapping. And so we were able to kind of do these illustrations of the garments. And that was kind of different and neat. And I got to work with a catalog printer. So I learned a lot about printing, and I had previously worked for a printer when I was just out of school, so I had a little bit of print expertise. And, I was kind of thinking this, everything happens for a reason. So I've taken that information and applied it to this, and it helped kind of make a great selling tool for the company to kind of use.
So why don't you tell me about what a designer does? I know you've already sort of gone over some of the things, but that specific job of designer, what does that entail?
So for the designer role, we worked in seasons. So we were typically working in a spring season and a fall season, and doing 2 catalogs and doing trade shows that kind of coincided with those seasons. So we would show our line. At the time, this was like cotton sweaters, wool sweaters. So we tended to show a lot more cotton sweaters in the spring and summer, and wool sweaters in the fall and winter, of course, and a bigger line for fall and winter, because wool was our thing. We had a lot of wool, boiled wool, double knits, and like that. So we would work on our seasons. We would work on a color palette. I'd work with the VP. He would come up with yarn ideas. He would have yarn vendors come to him, and he'd work with the mill to get the right plies, and we would try to create some novelty yarns, and we would work those into our line. We would have a button vendor come in and show us what the latest buttons were. And it was just really very cool and organic, and we would pull it all together. We would come up with themes. And this is commonly done today, is that you come up with themes and color palettes for every season, and that will rotate. And you can actually subscribe to trend services to find out which trends, which color trends, and which design trends are going to be most popular or least popular, and find out, you might want to know just what you should avoid doing, like what's in, what's out, that sort of thing. So they tend to make a lot of the decisions in terms of the overall aesthetic for the company while remaining on brand, because that's really important to know who your customer is and who they aren't, so that you're designing for the right clientele.
how much of your job was actually designing new product?
Probably a really small part of it.
Hmm.
There's so much involved in executing it. So we might get a great yarn in, for example, and we'd find these great yarns and we would try to say, oh, this is really lofty. And we'd feel it and we'd say like, well, this would make a great hoodie, or this would make a good pullover. So sometimes like sculpture, the yarn would tell you what it's good for. Other times it might not have enough body. And so we would ask a spinner if they could add more plies to it so that we could kind of get more of just a richer hand feel, so that we don't make garments that feel really skimpy or anything like that. So there's lots to consider with knitwear in terms of like tension and the knit, and you don't want it to be like too open so that it just grows on the hanger and then you end up with a garment that's down to your knees. So there's a lot to consider when you're like building garments like that. It's always a collaboration, and this is a really important thing to understand. I don't think I've ever been in a design position where I was calling all the shots. You have to listen to your sales team because you have to understand what's been selling and what hasn't been. You have to know your customer really intimately and understand how the customer can change and their needs can change.
So all the stops that you had made over the years, which we haven't gotten to yet, they already had a pretty good line of clothing that you were really just adding to. It's not like you were designing every piece of clothing that was coming off the line. They already had some things that were working and all of that. So it wasn't, again, when we think of a designer, they think of, oh, they make one dress and that's their thing, or they make 6 things for the year. That's not what you were doing at all.
So in most positions that I've been in, they'll add in like 5 to 10% new. And then they'll tend to recolor a lot of styles that have worked before in the past because your best sellers. They'll probably continue to keep selling. You don't want to like stop selling your best pieces. So we might change a color. We might lab dip more knit colors or more woven colors to get to expand a line. But at the same time, we only want to create like a little like 5 to 10% new every time. You can do a lot more than that for sure. There's like a tipping point where you're risking too much. And, a lot of companies have other people holding the purse strings. So you need to have a real strong strategy in place, a really good understanding of your business.
Selling is the number one thing, I think, for most of the companies you've worked for. It's not necessarily about reputation and such.
And you don't go into that mentality when you're in college. And when you're in college, you're like, I'm going to make outlandish things. I'm going to turn people's attention, or I want to make clothing for rock stars. And that's fantastic. You can definitely get gigs like that where you're making custom clothing for celebrities. That's a whole nother piece of it. What I fell into over my career was clothing geared towards the American public, mass-produced clothing, and working for some pretty notable brands over the years.
All right, well, let's get into some of those notable brands. So you do 9 years at Alps Sportswear, and it's time to move on.
And then I landed in my own hometown, strangely enough. I landed at TJX, and they're right on Route 30 in Framingham. Their headquarters was like under my nose the whole time. Unbeknownst to me, they did product development there, and they have a whole product development team. They don't talk too much about it, but they have a lot of private labels. Maybe that's not such a huge surprise to anybody, but they do make product. They buy what they can from the market with designer label, and if they know that lace or florals or tropical swimwear are going to be in and popular, they might want to also consider making clothing under their own private label brand, and they can be very profitable doing that work as well. And that's what I had been with Alps for a good 9 years, and I looked at it as an opportunity to grow. And I learned so much within a small amount of time about different kinds of apparel design and development. Women's dresses, women's skirts, men's swim, boys' swimwear. I was there doing apparel for TJX for only 2.5 years, but I learned quite a lot about how to prepare artwork to be like no questions. You hand it off to your factory in Asia, and they know exactly which stitch to use where, which color. It was a really wonderful way for me to use my CAD skills and to create really excellent artwork for them. So I did a lot of really nice women's wear with them and knitwear eventually for them for many, many years. I was there for about over 7 years, but only after 2.5 years, I went down the home area and took a real departure from my career path in that this was like my first time developing and designing product for the home. And that was like a whole nother whirlwind.
So clearly your job as designer at TJX, and just to be clear, TJX is TJ Maxx, Marshalls. What other brands did they have? Other stores?
Sierra is now under their umbrella. Over in UK and Canada, it's TK Maxx.
Right. Just so people know what stores we're talking about when we say TJX.
And Home Goods. And we worked with the Home Goods team a lot too. They have their own design team.
So your role as designer certainly changed with a bigger company. It was more design focused versus having to wear many hats. You still probably had to wear many hats, but not nearly as many as you did at Alps, correct?
Correct. To be clear, I was a design specialist and then I became a design manager. And the difference between that and being a designer is that you're not, I was no longer calling the shots. I was part of a team, a development team. We helped execute artwork so that we could get the apparel made as efficiently and effectively as possible with like no questions asked. So like really understanding what materials we were using. And we did get to do some work with our merchants who would go out to stores and shop and find samples and ideas, and we'd rip things apart and reconstruct things and redesign. There's a lot of that goes on in the marketplace. And so we were very, very, very careful. I learned a lot about trade dress and legal issues because occasionally you can get into trouble if you copy something too closely. We would have all these rules in place, like the scale needed to change, the colors needed to change, the design needed to change by 35%. So even though maybe it was an arbitrary number, but we had to take an effort so that we could avoid getting sued because nobody wants that.
Nobody likes to get sued. Period.
Nobody likes to get sued. So, but we were very conscientious about it there. And that's where I kind of learned a lot about how to avoid problems, how to avoid cease and desists and things like that.
So you moved down to home department. This is a total departure.
It is.
Although, I mean, honestly, going to Alps was a total departure of what you learned in college, and going to TJX as a designer there was a total departure for the most part, right? Because you were strictly knitwear at Alps, and now you're doing all kinds of other things at TJX, and now you go to the home.
I always like to grow and learn, and I still have the thirst for that to this day. And I felt like it was a really great opportunity for me. And it was a very, very small department with only, I think I was probably the third person on the home team doing product development. It felt really exciting because there was so much opportunity. Like they hadn't been developing bedding and they hadn't been developing the private labels that go along with all of this. So there was so much work to be done. And it was really exciting. And in the 5 or so years that I was there with that team, it just blew up. We were doing seasonal product, and then I had to make a choice between hard home and soft home. And of all things, I landed on photo frames and this one aisle in TJ Maxx and Marshalls that has all the photo frames and albums and things like that. And all of a sudden I'm getting on planes and I'm going overseas, and I'm in factories in China and Taiwan, and it was fabulous. It was a lot asked of me to do that because, it takes a chunk out of your life to have to get on a plane and make these Asia trips, but it was really fascinating. So I do appreciate all of those opportunities and the really big growth experiences for me, and it was great while it lasted.
Well, this is a great lesson in the sense that you go to school for fashion design, looking at doing gowns, and you bounce around different things and learn and learn and learn, and you're doing different apparel and different things. And all of a sudden, picture frames? How does that happen? And I mean, obviously that's a great example that if you grow, you can find a home kind of anywhere, right?
Right. And for me, I just kind of embraced the opportunity to try working in a different medium. With this department, it was a lot of like epoxy and stones and resins and different metal colors. And it was just, again, a whole new world to dive into. And I also really liked the buying team quite a lot. I really enjoyed these people. They were pretty good at what they did, and they were really into their metrics and their business. And they would share with me like their spreadsheets, and they wanted me to know what worked and didn't work. And that was just really valuable to see. To see what worked and what didn't, and what colors worked, and what was a total, what were dogs. And I really enjoyed that opportunity to travel with them and to learn all about the business there. They do a lot of things right.
So you end up doing home for how many years?
I was there for about 5 years in the home department,
5.
and
Yeah.
then 2.5 in apparel. So it's about 7.5 altogether.
Great. Then a new opportunity opens up and you head off into a different direction.
Well, not quite. I got a headhunter call and I landed at a home decor company down in Randolph, and I was there for about 4 years. And that was a really great opportunity to lead a team. I had been looking for managerial opportunities at TJX, and they just really weren't presenting themselves. They really liked me in the like art execution role, just like getting it made and churning it out. And I was looking for a little more leadership, and I didn't see the opportunity coming for me, opening up anytime soon. When a headhunter called me with this opportunity, I thought, this sounds like really what I've been looking for. Or maybe I just putting it out to the universe. I don't really know. But I ended up managing a team of designers that were about 6 full-time designers. And again, it was the same world that I had just been working in for the last couple of years with photo frames. And so it was an opportunity to be that design director, and not just a designer or design manager or a specialist, but really calling the shots and helping to formulate what the little design capsules were going to be, what those trends were going to be. And we would present those ideas to Kohl's and Cracker Barrel and all kinds of retailers around the world and around the country, really. And that was a really cool gig. It was a really great opportunity to manage a team and to have to manage their workflow and keep all the artwork. Like, I would have to check it all over before we whenever we sent artwork out, just making sure that the specifications were right, the measurements were right, everything was, that we were really thorough and clear with our direction to the factory, because we really have like one shot of making all of these samples. And for them, it was a lot of photo frames that might say like mother on it, or that you'd give to someone on Mother's Day, or they had a lot of really quirky items like that, novelty photo frames. And we were like fighting for inches of shelf space in some of these retailers. And so again, that's where my having a knowledge of sales and marketing and sell through and understanding how important all of that real estate is in a retail setting, whether you're an awarded an end cap or not, it's like gold. That's just money for the company. And so it was, again, a really different kind of experience. We had a showroom that we had to turn over and make it look spectacular every time our clients came in. And we would do special designs for Kohl's and for everyone that we worked with. So it was
Even TJX.
And even TJX, yes, I know that we did. And, we'd have to like make we'd have to work with photographers to find the little papers that go inside. It's all those little details, the packaging, deciding whether we wanted to do QR codes on our boxes and packaging, and coming up with the colors. And it was a whole different environment, a whole different ball of wax. But it was, again, creative work that came to me at a time when I just, I wanted a bigger experience. So I got it.
And that was a good experience. Again, the education you're getting from each stop. I mean, you're obviously bringing a lot to it, but the education you're getting just by doing new things is a big mind-opening experience. Mm-hmm. So that ends up sort of collapsing as I know.
Does, yeah.
Yeah, and that's okay. That happens. But the company ends up collapsing, and then what?
Yeah, that company had some layoffs, and that landed me in like a little bit of a limbo time where I was like my first layoff, and it wasn't going to be my last, but it was the first time I just wasn't sure what I was going to do next. But the thing I knew was that companies like Reebok and Converse and New Balance were making a big presence in Boston. I kept my eyes on everybody that was making clothing and that was like setting up shop in Boston. And eventually I ran into someone at my daughter's elementary school who had a New Balance t-shirt on. And I asked him if he worked there. And he says, no, I don't, but my wife does. And through this one parent, I was able to get an interview for a totally new job in apparel that I hadn't really even thought of before. And that was as a color developer. And this position is in the apparel area within New Balance. And the way they had the role set up was that it was part color development and part trim development. At the time, they needed someone working on all of the elastics and rivets and zippers and really owning all of the trims that go on to the New Balance product. And it's not an easy job.
Strictly apparel.
Strictly apparel. Yep, not the footwear.
Right.
You occasionally would work with the footwear team on special projects, but not that often. This was working with light boxes and spectrophotometers, and it was a really, really cool experience. And I dove in. It was at the time where we were about to move into the new building, and so we had to kind of make sense of the way the last person had unexpectedly left, and nothing had been done. Everything was just in buckets and bins, and nothing had been filed. We didn't know what was active and what wasn't, and so we really had to get it all organized and come up with a process and come up with systems. And I had all the knowledge of how to do all of that. I got to build the color lightbox room in the new building, which was really a wonderful experience.
So what is a color specialist? I mean, what are you doing and how important is that?
It's a color development role, and color development is ensuring that all of your fabrics are matching back to the specified color standard. And everyone has heard of Pantone. There are other color companies out there like CSI, Color Solutions International, and there's one called Coloro that a lot of companies use. And they will create color standards, even if you needed to create a special color, like if you were a college that had a really unique color palette, these companies can help you develop a specific color. So like there's a Coca-Cola red, there's different colors that that you see them and you identify with them. So anyway, that aside, color management is driving all of your fabrics and trims that go into your garment, driving those all back to the color standard, making sure they match, and not only making sure they match, but making sure they match under different light sources. So we were evaluating color, the fabric that would go into your shirts and shorts and sweatshirts. We were evaluating all of those colors to make sure the cuffs matched and the zippers matched and all the components that go into that garment are all aligned. And colors can change when you shift from one lighting source to another. So for instance, when we're looking at color within a light box, there will be multiple light sources on that light box. So for instance, if you are looking at simulated daylight, that's D65. They call that D65 lighting. And you can change that lighting to emulate store lighting, which would be like a cool white fluorescent lighting. There are all kinds of lighting lighting contaminants that you can run into. LED lighting, video monitors can throw off your lighting in your stores. There's so many factors and things to consider. We were getting into all of that when we were working at New Balance and working with color. But mostly to start off, my role was making sure the trims match back to the main body fabrics and everything. And a lot of time was spent on, I had to work with a running team. I had to work with, training teams. There was the core program. And, there's so many different programs that were all going on at once. And then also on top of that, they would work with these collabs like Bodega and J. Crew. And so we were always spinning a lot of different programs all at the same time. And so we were responsible for getting colors right. And it'd be like 75 colors every season that were like probably totally brand new. And so we would have to get them set up in our PLM system. We would have to order the threads and zippers from our suppliers, from YKK, from A&E, from Coates. And we'd have to make sure that all of these things matched so that when our factories looked at their BOM, their bill of materials, they were ordering the correct colors. So it was a really huge job with a lot of pressure, a lot of deadlines. And it was a really focused part of the apparel industry. Like color management is like a whole cool world where, I mean, it's really important to get the color right because as a consumer, when you walk into the store, you see a jacket and like the cuffs don't match. And you're like, how did this happen? And that's because they probably didn't have a good color developer working on that garment, ensuring that the colors didn't match. They should match. They should match better, especially if you're paying $200 for the coat. So,
and it's a real science, right? Because different materials soak in dye differently.
Right. And
correct?
Yes, and they reflect light differently too. So like and some fabrics can only absorb so much dye. And so sometimes the designer, and then I would have to go back to the designers quite often actually and say, well, you have a nylon jacket and then you want this going with a polyspan short. And these are the brightness limitations that we're going to have with each of these two different fabrics, because each of these different fabrics, they're not working together really great. And by the way, one of them comes from Hong Kong and the other one comes from Taiwan. So and maybe this zipper comes from Japan. And so all these things coming together from three different factories sometimes would create a really big problem. And we would try to correct those problems as soon as we could see those lab dips and understand this is the jacket. This is the jacket, and it's also going to be used on a short. And we need to understand how that fabric is going to be used. The challenge of that job also is that you're only looking at a 2-inch swatch. So you have to kind of understand on like a micro level, like what it's going with and how it's going to be used. And if it's a pocket bag lining, we don't care so much. If it's not matching the color standard exactly, then we have to pass that. But if it's something that's on the outside of the garment, that's going to be really shown, that's going to be shown a lot, or if it's going to land on the New York Marathon and it's going to be a high visibility product, like you need to take time to get it right.
Well, and I know you talked about lab dips, and lab dips, correct me if I'm wrong, that the factory will do a sample dip in a sample dye and then send that to you so that you can do the comparison to make sure that you get it. And then you give them instructions if it's not right. So like what kind of instructions? So
when I evaluate color, I look at color in terms of light and chroma and hue, those three things. So I'll look at the lightness is like the depth of the color, the chroma, the brightness, and the hue, which is the actual the spectrum of color. So sometimes the most obvious thing is the hue. You might look at a color and say, all right, well, here's a red. If you've ever chosen a paint color, it's kind of similar. Like you might look at it and say, it's too pinky. It's got too much red in it. So we might tell a factory, go less red and add yellow, to the opposite of that color, to kind of balance out the color a little bit. And 2 weeks later, we'll get a second lab dip in and hopefully we can pass it.
And that's tough because 2 weeks is a long time, and you said you got a lot of deadlines. So you're shipping things back and forth with the Far East, right. And that's a tough situation there.
So eventually, I ended up moving up the ladder at New Balance, and then pretty soon I was their color manager, and I was doing all the apparel, not just the trims, but I was doing the apparel. And there's just so much volume, like, because there were so many programs that were changing and shifting all the time. And they'd work on tennis programs that involved Coco Gauff. So some of them were like really high visibility prints and patterns that really just needed to be right. Because these are like now like celebrity tennis players wearing your clothing, so they need to look good. And sometimes on camera, you can see these athletes and the colors don't match. And sometimes you get backed into a corner and you have to accept something. And sometimes I just really feel for those people when they have to they have to pass it. And they have no choice.
And you're such a perfectionist anyway, so I understand that.
So in that way, it was a kind of a good role for me. And it was kind of a bad role for me. I'm highly collaborative. And so the good thing about this role, the role of color management, is that you get a chance to work with the designers and the materials team. There's so many different kinds of people that you're talking to every day, the factories, and you really get to do a lot of cross collaboration work with the apparel team in the color management role. So I like that.
It's not just learning curve there. You have an incredible talent for color.
I have high color acuity.
Yeah, well, and all your senses are very...
I guess so, yes.
You smell things before I do.
I'm sensitive.
You hear things.
I always said that I could have been probably a really good perfumier. I have a heightened sense of... I'm just sensitive to a lot of things. Smells, taste, touches.
But that's a talent that you can bring...
Cancer, I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's a talent you can bring to the table. Obviously, you've got a specific eye to be able to do that. But there's certainly opportunities for folks to do that, even if they don't have that.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. So, and like as a color manager too, we all got color tested by X-Rite Pantone. They came to New Balance one day and they gave us a color test. They gave us the Munsell 100 color test, where you have 100 color chips arranged in trays of 25, from green to blue, from blue to yellow, from yellow to red, from red to blue. It's given to you unorganized. Like they're all each tray of 25 is scrambled, and you have to put them in the correct order from green to blue and not make any mistakes.
It's crazy.
It was a lot of fun, a little pressure. They do time you on it, but that's not that you're really. I don't think the timing really factored into it too much. But I ended up with superior color discrimination rating, so I was pretty happy with that. Lotsofmaps.com. Vintage, local, national, and world maps for an affordable price. 99% of our maps are $25 or less. Great as gifts. Frame them or put them under glass for your home, vacation home, or as a memory of a special place. Lotsofmaps.com.
So eventually you moved on from there.
I had a placement agency call me, and they had a role for a color management job at No Bull. So I ended up moving over there. They were a growing CrossFit company. I thought, well, maybe this is my time to move on and wipe the slate clean and start over again with a new company that was about to open a beautiful new building in Boston. So I made the move.
And similar job to what you were doing at New Balance, but smaller team, obviously, right?
Right. And they did have a ton of color problems because they didn't really have anybody in this role checking. And they were a small company, so they were making, smaller runs of, athletic apparel, but they didn't really have any continuity over the years. So they ended up with 20 shades of army green that didn't really work well together, and thread colors that didn't quite work out, and just everything needed to be evaluated and kind of reined in. And so once again, I kind of, as the problems arose, I tried to fix them. They tried to target certain colors for me to kind of try to problem solve the ones that were really resulting in the highest customer returns. So, because, when you order an expensive pair of pants and you're a top that matches it, you want them to go together. And sometimes they weren't. Or sometimes this color standard would change and you'd end up with mixed inventory, and customers would be disappointed that way. So we were always trying to squash all of those problems by, isolating the bad colors and putting them in a pop-up shop instead of online. So yeah, it was a great opportunity to kind of do what I did at New Balance and create from scratch, because they had a new building. And again, I was helping build out the color department at No Bull.
And so you were there for 2 years, I believe, correct?
Yep, almost exactly to the day.
To the day. And poof.
And poof. Then No Bull had some serious financial issues, and they ended up laying 85 of us off in two fell swoops, not one, but two. I'm glad I took the opportunity. Nothing is permanent in this world. That was my second layoff in my career, and they happen.
Okay. And then up pops your current job.
Yeah, and that was a big surprise to me because, and I called it a kind of a full circle moment. After this noble layoff, and I just want to talk about this little thing that happened because it was kind of like I had like this epiphany moment when we were in Ireland. It was a rainy day, and we had like this tiny little window. And we had driven by this little tiny weaver, and they were open, and they had like a little shop out front. And boy, was that charming! And I just said to everybody, like, I'm gonna run down the street in the rain to this little. Can you guys just pick me up there? I need like 10 to 20 minutes in this place, and the tour driver that we were with did that. And I walked into this place, and it was like immediately I was hit with all those old smells, like the lanolin and the yarns, all of those, the machinery oils, and I just felt something. I don't know what it was, but it was like, I'm like, oh, how do I get back into this world of like this? They had weaving looms and knitting looms, and there were artisans that were making stuff right there, and they were all hands on. It was all colors and yarns and swatches, and I'm taking pictures of everything, and they're telling me about their antique machinery, and it reminded me so much of like where I started. And I kind of wanted that back again, but I didn't really know how I was going to do that at the time because I was just like newly let go from this position and kind of like just doing a lot of soul searching. So I didn't know. And when I got home, I just started kind of putting things out to the universe and kind of starting to try to verbalize what I really wanted out of my next position. I don't know if everyone believes in that kind of stuff, but I find it really helpful to kind of articulate what you want out of your next job. And I ended up applying for a job at Coldwater Creek, which was kind of a mystery to me because I didn't even know how they were in the state of Massachusetts. This was a company that years ago I knew was in Sandpoint, Idaho, because when I worked with Alps Sportswear, we sold to them. A lot of my sweater designs were in their early catalogs like years ago. So I found this really strange and odd. And then I thought, aren't they in Florida? I just don't understand. How can they be in Pembroke, Massachusetts? And I applied to 2 jobs. I didn't get any response for the first resume that I sent. And then they had another position that opened up for a product development specialist. And they called me, and I was like, I had an interview, and then I had another interview. And then the next thing I know, I have a job offer. And it's been great there. So now I feel like I'm kind of back where I started from in some ways, back to my roots where I'm working with looking at yarn cards and making a lot of decisions about how embroideries are going to be executed. And we have a great design director who kind of, establishes all of our color palettes and themes for every season. And she works closely with our president, and together we all build this. It's a big team effort. With a lot of people signing off on all of the artwork. It's creative. I get to work with prints and embroideries, and it's changing and evolving all the time. It's catalog and web, which is, I've dabbled in before, but it's the way they build catalogs here is fascinating and so well thought out. And so it's really great to be part of a team that is so in touch with their customers and understands how to make really great product. And at the end of the day, that's really all I really want to be doing is like making great apparel. I don't need to be working for like high-end fashion designers or big gigantic label names. It's great to be able to work with real people who really care about the integrity of their product and their brand. And that's where I'm happiest. That's where I thrive.
Absolutely. Obviously, the skills that you've learned over the years, starting with your home life, going all the way through all of those jobs and different education levels with every stop you made, makes you a very valuable person to bring to a team, and that's really neat. Let me ask you this. What kind of suggestions would you have for somebody that might be interested at a high school or college level, or maybe even later in life, to possibly get a hand in something like what you do?
I mean, I would recommend checking into your local colleges just to see what kind of course offerings they have. Fashion has just been a very popular course choice. So I think a lot of schools are tending to offer some degree of apparel, whether it's fashion merchandising or brand development. I found it really helpful for me to take pre-college courses that were open to, high school juniors and seniors. A lot of colleges offer these kinds of classes, whether it's, fashion history, any kind of thing that you can put on your resume that shows your intent in being in this industry is going to help you. I believe that really helped me get seen. I didn't just have my high school information on my application. I was able to say I took the initiative to take these pre-college courses because this means something to me. Other things like leadership are certainly going to help you if you're part of any kind of club. Start a fashion club. Get your friends together that like talking about those things. Like you can make something. Find people that have your similar interests. I can very vividly recall all of my high school friends who were interested in fashion like I was. And it was good to partner with them and to bounce things off of.
Well, and obviously there's a ton of jobs. You've held a bunch of different jobs, but there's more than just designer, because that was really kind of what you went to school for.
I did.
But clearly there's a lot of different moving parts and a lot of different angles that need to be looked at. So opportunities are there for a lot of folks.
They're everywhere. And I loved materials. I loved working with the fabric companies and finding the right bottom weight fabric for leggings and things that were going to drape a certain way. And all of those things, that's one facet of the apparel business is materials. And then there's tags and labels and graphic design if people like that piece of it, marketing, merchandising. There's so many wonderful parts of the apparel industry. It's a struggle. It's not easy. There are companies that die every day, companies that are new, exciting companies that are coming up all the time. I didn't really touch on the situation of American manufacturing in this country, and some of it's trying to come back. I hope that it does, but it takes a lot of money, and people don't necessarily want to pay for something that's American made because it's about 2 to 3 times, maybe more, what you would normally pay for if you were buying something in Asia. So there are domestic jobs that can be had, and if you can get in there, or even if you can work in retail, in clothing, specifically in clothing retail, you will learn so much about consumers and their tastes and what they buy and what they don't. If you're a high school student, just getting a job at a store or a clothing store I found really helpful. I found that just to be like really fascinating consumer research.
I would assume that being curious is a big part of that. Trying new things, learning just by observing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that's definitely one of my core traits, is that I am curious and I'm driven to learn more all the time. I mean, that's what life's all about.
And we always talk on the show about passion. All of my guests have been very passionate about what they do. And clearly you are very passionate about what you do. I've seen that firsthand. But What do you think's driving you?
I mean, I guess I'm probably a product of my environment for sure. As I started saying, my parents are both creatives, and I came out of that that environment. So I think from a very early age, it was just something I was comfortable with, and I might not have always been doing the most outlandish, crazy things like cosplay and making wonderful, wild costumes. And I only dabbled in a little bit of that. But, I just kind of found my home in American apparel brands. And that's just been where my comfort level is and where I like to thrive.
Jennifer Jagolinzer, thank you for letting me come into your beautiful home and do this interview. I appreciate you coming on and telling us a lot about the fashion industry and all your different stops. And I think you're answering a lot of questions for a lot of different people about different aspects of the fashion world. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you very much for having me. And thanks for making such a great studio space down here.
So stay tuned for another episode of Occupations, the podcast, coming soon.
Occupations has been brought to you by lotsofmaps.com, Please follow Occupations the Podcast on Facebook and Instagram to find information about our next episode or to see what past episodes are available.